Hey there, folks. Mr. Finley here, and we're going to go over some preparation for the PSAT, which is coming up on October 16th. So what is the PSAT? Well, when you apply to college, they take your score from a standardized test, either the SAT or the ACT, and then they compare that with your GPA, and together those numbers let them know whether you're acceptable for admission. So it's a fairly important thing, this SAT. So it's something that's wise to do a little practice for, and that's where the PSAT comes in. The PSAT is short for preliminary SAT, and it gives you a chance to take the SAT and see how you do without it being dangerous. The scores don't count against you, but it will let you see where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are for when you take the real SAT. And you can take the PSAT as a freshman, as a sophomore, as a junior, to be prepared. The other thing the PSAT is useful for is if you take it during your junior year, it can also qualify you for something called the National Merit Scholarship. And that's a nice little chunk of money to carry around to college with you if you score high enough on the PSAT in your junior year. You won't be eligible for that this year when you take it, but this will give you some really useful practice for when you finally do take the PSAT for the scholarship or when you actually take the SAT for college admissions. The thing to keep in mind about the PSAT is it's a big test, it takes several hours, and there are 3 sections to it. There's a section for critical reading in which you will read a sentence or passage and try and figure out what it's talking about, what's going on there. There's a section on math in which you'll both be answering multiple choice questions and questions where you will grid in the answers. And then there's a section on writing skills. This is grammar and things like tone and things like that, in which you will look at sentences and paragraphs and figure out how to fix them or improve them. Overall strategies for the test. The thing to realize is that all standardized tests, they're trying to test your knowledge of various areas. But the fact is that no test can do that perfectly. And so in some ways, a standardized test tests how well you take tests. And luckily, that means that there are some very, very easy, straightforward strategies that have nothing to do with being smart or even knowing the information that will really help you on those tests. So the first thing is to make sure you know the directions for each type of question, and we'll go over those in this video. So when you see them, you know what they're asking for, and you don't have to waste precious time trying to figure out how this question works. Make sure that you're using the test booklet for scratch work. You'll have a pencil, so underline things in the test booklet, circle words you think are important, draw figures and diagrams for the math questions, mark all over your test book. It will really help you. The test is timed, so work steadily. Don't waste time on the hard questions. Just come back to them. If you can't see a clear answer after a minute or two of work, circle it, move on, and then come back to that one. And then we get to this idea of guessing. This is sort of interesting. On most questions, except for the math grid-in questions, we'll talk about those, you lose 1/4 of a point for a wrong answer. It actually counts a little bit against you if you guess wrong. So if you have no idea whatsoever, it's better to leave a question blank rather than answer it. Because if you answer it, it can actually count against you. If you leave it blank, it doesn't count for or against. However, big deal. If you can confidently eliminate 1 or 2 of the choices, then you should take a guess between the remaining choices. Because if you can eliminate 1 or 2 of the choices, absolutely. So instead of it being 1 choice out of 5 or 1 choice out of 4, it's a choice out of 2 or 3, then suddenly the odds are now in your favor. And therefore, statistically speaking, if you can get it down to 2 or 3 choices, then it makes sense to go ahead and make that guess. And the more choices you can eliminate, the higher your chances will be. Okay, let's look at some of the specific questions. One of the types of questions you'll encounter in the reading section is a sentence completion question. And it will give you a sentence just like the one you see there, and there's going to be 1 or 2 blanks in the sentence just like you see there. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to read the whole sentence and try and figure out a word for each of the blanks that makes sense. Then look at your answer choices and see if you can find one that has words that mean the same things as the words that you would have put in those blanks to make the sentence make sense. Make sure that you watch out for, and you might even want to circle them in your test book, any connecting words like but or not or because. Those are going to be really important because they're going to connect the blanks either to an idea that's already in the sentence or to each other. And that leads to this next point. If you've got a sentence with two blanks, like that sentence up there, make sure that your answer choices work for both blanks in that sentence. Because oftentimes there will be a trap answer that there'll be a word that will work for the first blank, but then the second word in that answer won't work for the second blank. So make sure you check both of them. And then before you actually mark your answer on the answer sheet, read the complete sentence with your word choices filled in to sort of double check on that. The other sort of questions you'll see in the reading section are the passage-based questions. And in these, they're going to ask you to read a paragraph or two and then answer some questions about it. There's always going to be an introduction before the passage, and it will usually tell you where the passage is from and who wrote it and the context. Always, always, always read that first, because there's going to be clues in there that are going to help you. A lot of people skip over that and go straight to the passage because they just think, oh, that's just more instructions. Don't do that. Read that introduction first. Then, before reading the actual passage, read the questions associated with it. Usually there'll be 3 or 5 or 8 questions associated with a given passage. Read those questions first, just very quickly, because then you'll know what you should be looking for when you read the passage. And then, you've read the introduction, you've read the questions, go through and read the passages quickly and carefully. Sometimes you're going to have multiple passages, and they're going to ask you to compare them. When you're asked to compare an aspect of a pair of passages, don't be misled by answers that are correct, but only for one of the two passages. So, for example, if you read two passages and one of them is negative about an idea, and one of them is talking about that same idea in a positive way, and one of the answer choices says, these passages are positive. Well, that may be true for one of the passages, but you've got to figure out the answer that works for both of them. And then also make sure that you select the choice that best answers the question asked. Don't select an answer choice just because it's true. They will throw in trap answers that are true statements but that don't actually relate to the question. So always make sure that the answer choice is actually answering the question rather than just, okay, this is a true thing. Then we move on into math. There's going to be, first of all, math multiple choice questions. These include both word and number problems, and you are allowed to use a calculator. So make sure you're using that to double check all of your math through this. Before you begin work on each question, look at the answer choices, because that's going to give you a pretty solid idea of the range in which the answers are going to fall. And if you get an answer that's way off, that's not even related to any of the answers listed, you're probably going about the question wrong. Oftentimes you're going to do word problems, so when you do that, underline in the textbook, the test booklet, what the question is asking. It's going to throw all kinds of different numbers at you and information, and it's going to try and confuse you. But make sure that you actually underline what it's actually asking you for, and then sort of work backward from there. It's also very helpful to draw a picture when a figure is being described. If it talks about a triangle with these kind of angles, it may have a picture, it may not have a picture with that. Always draw a figure if it describes one, because a lot of the questions are geometry based and it's going to help you visualize that. And then in your answers, be very careful about things like fractions and decimals. Often there's going to be a trap answer that is very similar to the right answer, but it's going to be off by a decimal place in one direction or the other. So always double check your work on those kind of things, because they love those to give you trap answers for. Then some of the math questions are going to be grid-in questions. These are not multiple choice. The way these work is you figure it out, and then you write your answer in a set of boxes along the top of that grid that you see at the right, and then you mark the matching number in the circles below, and then the Scantron machine can read the number that you picked based on what's in those circles. Make sure that you're filling those in very carefully. This is interesting, though, about the PSAT. Because you don't lose points for a wrong answer on the grid-ins like you do on the multiple choice, it is worthwhile to guess on these if you have even a probable guess, because it's not going to be counted against you. And then we move on to the section on reading comprehension, which is going to have you both read sentences as well as read passages and see if you can identify where problems are and how to improve it in general. One type of question are the identifying sentence errors questions. And these questions, they're going to give you a sentence like the one you see there that probably has an error in it, and there are going to be different sections that are underlined. You need to choose the underlined section that would need to change in order to fix that error. Now, you don't need to actually figure out what the fix would be. You just need to say this underlined section here is wrong. And there's the answer. So what you're going to do is you're going to read the sentence carefully, but quickly, and see if you can spot an error, and then you choose the answer choice that identifies that error. So in the sentence there, the other delegates and him immediately accepted the resolution drafted by the states. Clearly that him is wrong. It ought to be he. But you don't even need to know that it ought to be he. You just need to know that the other delegates and him is incorrect grammatically. So you're going to choose B as your answer there, because that's the section that would need to change in order to make it work. Be careful, though, because some sentences don't have an error. Everything is right, and it's a trap. So there's an answer E for no error. So don't be afraid to mark no error if you believe the sentence is correct. It's going to be a fairly small number that will have no error in them, but there will be some, most likely, that will have no error. My suggestion is to move pretty quickly through this section. And if you have hard questions, the ones you don't get, just mark them and come back to them, because the later reading section questions are going to take more time. So we want to get through these fairly quickly. The next kind of question in the reading section is the improving sentences questions, in which case there's going to be a sentence, and a section of it is going to be underlined, like you see there. And then you're going to choose an answer choice that replaces just the underlined section and should improve the clarity of the sentence. So first you'll read the sentence carefully but quickly, and you'll pay very special attention to the underlined section, because that's the section you're going to be replacing. Then think how you'd fix the underlined portion, and then look among the answers for a choice that matches the changes you'd make. So looking at that sentence there, Laura Ingalls Wilder published her first book, and she was 65 years old. Okay, it's grammatically correct, but no one talks that way. The way that I'd say that sentence is, Laura Ingalls Wilder published her first book when she was 65 years old. That makes a lot more sense. So then I would look for an answer choice that says when she was 65 years old, because that's how I would replace that underlined section. Now again, there can be some traps here. Sometimes they're going to put a sentence there that is totally fine, exactly as it is. In that case, if you think the sentence is correct as written and should not be changed, then choose choice A, which is always going to be the same as the sentence given. And the last section will be the improving paragraphs questions. In these sections, you're going to read a paragraph or two, and it's going to have some errors in it, and it's going to ask you how to fix some of those errors. It's like looking at a first draft of something and being asked how to revise it. So first, you're going to read the whole passage carefully and quickly to determine its meaning and its tone. Tone is so important. You need to be able to read something and say, okay, is this serious? Or is this guy being sarcastic? Knowing the tone is going to be really important, because there's usually going to be one or two questions that ask about that tone. Is it comic? Is it serious? Is it personal? Is it informative? Being able to recognize that is important. And then when you're making the answers, make sure your answer even if it's about a particular sentence or section, makes sense in the context of the passage as a whole. So that is to say, if it's really formal, the passage is really formal, like it's a medical text or something, or a legal text, and one of your answers asks you to change a sentence, and one of the answers is correct, but it feels really informal, like you'd write an email or maybe a personal story, that doesn't fit within the overall context of the thing, which is serious. So always make sure that whatever choices you're making fit within the whole passage. And then, when you're asked to make a choice, make sure you choose the best answer from among the choices given. Even if you can imagine another correct response, or even a better one, make sure that you identify one of the choices given that will work for you. So those are all the question types in the 3 different sections of the PSAT. It's a big test, it's time consuming, but here's the thing, don't panic. It's not going to hurt you. Your scores on this are not going to be counted against you. You should still do the best you can, because if you don't, it's not going to help you figure out where you need to work moving forward. But if you do the best you can on this, it's going to give you a really great diagnostic on where you have to work and where you have to study moving forward to get the best possible score you can on the actual SAT, and maybe even nab one of those national merit scholarships in your junior year. Good luck!